Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on lead and copper rule revisions, regulatory updates. I know this is a very important topic and very timely. I am Julie Floyd. I'm the Office of Drinking Water Training Manager, and I'm your host this morning. Our presenters will be Bob Edelman. He'll lead us off. He is the Office of Drinking Water Director of Technical Services. Then we have Tamara Anderson, who's currently our Lead Elimination Assistance Program Manager. Monitoring our chat, we have Paige Johns, a district engineer out of our Culpeper Field office, and Kendall Scott, an environmental health supervisor over our Lead in Schools program. A few housekeeping items. We've got a very large group here today. We're clocking at 250 already, and I think we're going to have some more in. So please mute your microphones. We will be handling all questions via chat. You can find the chat in the bottom right-hand corner of your window. It looks like a little conversation bubble. Click that and you should be able to see the chat. Please put all of your chats into everyone. Do not do direct chat messages because we may not see them and we won't be able to answer your questions. Also, if you have a question, very likely somebody else has the same question. Again, the content for today is being recorded. If you need to zoom in on any of the material that is being presented on the screen, there is a zoom feature built into WebEx. You'll see it at the very top middle above the slide that you're seeing on your screen. There's a zoom out, which looks like a minus, and a zoom in, which looks like a plus. So use those so that you can see what you need to see. We will be posting the recording and providing handouts on our website once it is available. One thing we're doing different this time is if you would like a certificate for contact hours, then at the end of the webinar, I will be putting the link to that form in the chat, and we would ask you to fill that out, and that way we can go ahead and get you that certificate. It may take us a little bit of time to process all of those, but that's how we're going to be doing it. And with that, again, put your questions in the chat, and if we can't get to them all, we will address them later. I believe our presenters have spots built into their presentations for handling questions that come up. But again, we'll just pause and grab extras out of the chat and address them there. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Bob, and here we go.
Good morning, Virginia, and welcome to Lead and Copper Rule Revisions webinar. And as a reminder, today is August 22nd. And if you're hearing this at a later time, things might have changed. So for today's webinar, we're going to cover at a high level what becomes effective October 16th, 2024, and then also what doesn't change. And we're going to talk about some details on the notices to the public, including public notices, consumer notification, the public education requirements under the Lead and Copper Rule. It turns out the Lead and Copper Rule changes some things in the consumer confidence report requirements, so we'll get into that. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on with the lead service line inventory reporting requirements, and then we'll wrap up with some funding. And so let's get into it. So at a high level, here are the things that become effective October 16th, 2024. The initial service line inventory is due, which means it needs to be uploaded into our electronic system no later than October 16th, 2024. In addition, it needs to be made publicly available, and for water systems that serve 50,000 and more, that needs to be available online. We'll get into some more details later on. The next thing is there's a requirement for notification of service line material and associated reporting back to the state. We'll provide more details in following slides. The Tier 1 public notification for action level exceedances. Again, more details to come. There's been some change to the health effects language that becomes effective, and there's some changes to consumer confidence reports also becomes effective. Now, a boatload of things are not changing, although they're in the lead and copper rule revisions. The proposed lead and copper rule improvements has specified that these things are not changing, which means that we're following the requirements in the 2021 Waterworks regulations or the 2020 version of the National Primary Drinking Water Regulations in the Code of Federal Regulations. So the things I have listed here, even though they're mentioned in the lead and copper rule revisions, are not changing at this time. They may be taken up in the lead and copper rule improvements later on. So just go through the list here. The action level is not changing. The trigger level and the associated requirements is not happening. The changes to sample tiers and sample site selection is not happening. We're staying with the current lead and copper rule sample tiers and sample site selections until the lead and copper rule improvements comes in. We're not doing 5th liter sample in homes with lead service lines. The tap sampling frequency is staying as it is under the current 2021 Waterworks regulations. There's the changes. There are no changes to water quality parameters. We follow the current Waterworks regulations. The lead and copper rule revisions talked about corrosion control treatment changes. Those are not coming at this time. There's a requirement for sanitary surveys that must review corrosion control treatment data. That's not happening. Find and fix is not happening. The mandatory lead service line replacement requirements that are specified in lead and copper rule revisions are not going in. The requirements for lead service line replacement plans and lead mitigation, that includes flushing and filters and public notices to customers, that's not happening. The small system flexibility options under lead and copper rule revisions is not happening. The requirement for customer notifications of works that could disturb lead service lines is being pushed off. And finally, the school and child daycare center sampling program, including a list of facilities that's required under the lead and copper rule revisions, it is not changing or not going into effect. So this is a long list, and it compares to a kind of a short list of things that need to be done. And so you might ask, how do we know that this is true? And so EPA published a 2021 LCRR implementation fact sheet back in April that spelled out what water systems need to do. And so we have that information, and that's available to the regulated public, and that's a link to that is on our website, as well as Office of Drinking Water's own fact sheet. In addition, we have the language that's in the draft lead and copper rule improvements, and what that says, and I'll highlight some things here. Maybe I can highlight some things. That community water systems and non-transient non-communities need to comply with 40 CFR 141.81 through 141.91. Those are the requirements for the lead and copper rule as codified on July 1st, 2020. So that's the old requirements, which reflect what's in the Waterworks regulations. And then these exceptions are things that water system needs to do. In addition, Virginia has a primacy extension agreement that reflects all of these things above. And so that's how we know what water systems are being expected to do. And so with that, I'll stop and ask if there's some questions that have come up.
We had one question which Paige has answered, and I think it's a really good question, was isn't the lead action level 15 parts per billion, not 10? And as Paige pointed out, it's 15 for now, but the LCRI is changing that to 10, correct? Okay.
Yes,
So thank,
that's the proposal. And
okay.
so for now, the lead action level is not changing.
All right. So thanks, Paige, for taking care of that. Another question we have, Bob, is can you expand on the tap sampling frequency?
So between now and 2027, water systems should continue with the requirements that are in the current waterworks regulations. So in other words, we are not changing the requirements or the tap sampling frequency at this time. And of course, the tap sampling frequency is based on the results and the history, the lead and copper tap sample results and the history of your particular water system. So it's a case by case basis. I think
Another
that,
question, another
yep.
question we have, Bob, is so if we're on triennial sampling due to reduced monitoring, do we stay on that schedule and sample sites for the time being?
So yes, for if your water system is on triennial, then between now and 2027, you'll continue on that. After 2027, we need to look at the lead and copper rule improvements to see what that says.
Okay. One more question we have is, are these expectations the same whether our
We do.
LCRI is, whether or not LCRI is finalized before or after October 16th?
Um, I would say these are the same.
Okay. And the only other thing is, we're getting several people, they're having trouble with audio and video. One thing that people are doing that might help is if you're having these issues, maybe try calling in with the number that we put in the chat so you can hear the audio and maybe try the video by itself without the audio. We have a lot of people attending this morning, so in the digital world, it's always taxing. One more question, Bob. My understanding was that the list of schools is still due October 16th, 2024. True or false?
That's not necessary. So that's not due.
Okay.
Okay, are we good to move ahead?
I believe so. I think that's it. So I think we can keep going. And everyone, thanks for putting the questions in. Keep them coming, and we'll get to them as soon as possible.
Okay, so let's move on to notices to the public. And that includes public notices, the consumer notification, and some consumer education requirements. And again, these become effective October 16th, 2024. And so for water systems that are completing their service line inventory, there's a requirement to notify customers when the customer has a lead service line or galvanized requiring replacement service line or unknown material service line. And that's due within 30 days of completion of the inventory and no later than October 15th, 2024. And this needs to be repeated annually thereafter. And in addition, if you have a new customer, then the requirement is at the time of service initiation that new customer needs to be notified that they have a lead service line or galvanized requiring replacement or unknown material service line. And so water systems should be aware that this is a new requirement and it's going to require a new business process. And that new business process is going to need to cover that annual notification that we just talked about once a year. And when a new customer starts service, and a lot of times that new customer is in an older or an existing home or residence, that they'll need to receive that notification of lead galvanized requiring replacement or unknown service line. And let's see if we get to the next slide. And so the content requirements, and let's zoom in to, if it's a lead service line, the requirement is that you have to notify clearly that the service line is lead. And there needs to be an explanation of the health effects for lead. And there's some specific required language, and we'll show that in a few slides. And you need to provide steps persons at the service connection can take to reduce their exposure to lead in drinking water. And we'll get into that. You'll need to provide information about opportunities to replace lead service lines. And we'll talk about that. And information on programs that provide financing solutions to replace the lead service line. And we'll have more details on that. And then finally, a statement that the water system is required to replace its portion of the lead service line when the property owner notifies that the water system that they are replacing their portion line. So these are all the requirements. So let's zoom into some of the details here. Let's see if I can find the button here. Here we go. No, let's see where. All right, so there are templates available to cover this notification, and I want you all to know that we have both templates that EPA has provided, and we also have a VDH template. We have links on our VDH Lead and Copper Rule Revisions Guidance webpage, and we'll take a trip out to go take a look at that. If your water system is using a template, you don't need Office of Drinking Water approval. And Office of Drinking Water doesn't want to have to approve, I don't know, 1,600 water systems templates. I would prefer that you use the template if you can. We'll talk about some guidance on how to use the templates in the following slides. But I would say that if you're going to deviate from the template, then that needs to be reviewed and approved by Office of Drinking Water. And so let's take a look at what's on our Office of Drinking Water website, so you can see where it is. And so if you Google VDH ODW LCRR guidance, that'll bring you here. And this is the top of the web page, and this might look familiar. We've posted a lot of guidance documents for the process of creating the service line inventory and uploading it and so on. Hello.
If you're demonstrating the website, we're still seeing the same slide.
You're still seeing the same slide. So that didn't.
Yes.
That didn't. So let me reshare then.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm looking for the share button. Here we go. How's that look? So this is
all right. Thank you.
Thank
yeah,
you.
It might have been just my view. A lot of people saying they're seeing it. So thank you.
Okay, no problem. Here we go. So we're on the website, and at the top, for example, to sign up for this webinar, you could click here. If you need help with your service line inventory, you can click here. We have a quick link to the training on how to submit your service line inventory is here. In this section, we have guidance for completing the service line inventory. And we have some things from EPA, but we'll go down toward the bottom of the web page, and here's where we have the templates for the consumer notification templates that we're talking about. And so we have the Office of Drinking Water templates down here, and the certification statement that we'll mention. And here's a link to the EPA templates. And if we scroll down a little bit further, there's some more templates. Our Office of Drinking Water's Tier 1 public notice template. And here's the EPA template and also the certification statement. So I'll come back here. So hopefully you can visit the web page and find the templates. So here's what else has changed. The health effects language is required language for the notices for lead service lines and lead status unknown service lines. And so since it's required, please do not modify this language. And you can read this at another time. But this is required to go into the notice, and so that's included in the templates. For the steps that you can take to reduce lead in the drinking water, here is some guidance on what Office of Drinking Water expects. You can use language, something like the first bullet here, which says daily allow the water to run at the tap for, and I have 5 minutes as read. That needs to be adjusted to fit the situation in your water system so that it addresses flushing the premise plumbing plus the service line. So if you give instructions, for example, to flush for 30 seconds or a minute or two until the temperature remains steady, that's not going to be appropriate because it flushes only the premise plumbing. So keep in mind this flushing needs to address, again, I'll repeat it, the premise plumbing plus the service line. And that needs to be tailored for your community. So if you happen to be an owner of multiple water systems, it might be that some water systems have shorter service lines than others, and so the instructions might be different. Okay, you might also take a look at the guidance from EPA. They have something that's a little bit less straightforward. For these steps, we have steps that include using cold water for drinking, cooking, and preparing baby formula, cleaning your aerator, and do not boil your water to remove lead. The expectation is at least the top 3 items that I just read should be included in your notice. Some of these other ones are optional, and they can be included if you like. So these are just example wordings from the ODW template. As far as having your water tested, this should be listed as a step, and this needs to be tailored to your community situation based on the availability of laboratory testing services in your community and what your water system is willing to provide and assist to your customers. So for example, it's allowable for a water system to provide the water sample test kit and charge a fee for that, so that covers the cost of the contract laboratory. So that's okay. The lead copper rule basically says that it's not a requirement for the water system to pay for the cost of lead testing. Now, in your for lead service lines, there's a requirement to provide information about lead service line replacement. And the expectation is to provide meaningful and actionable information to the customers about the water system's lead service line replacement plan. And that means what to expect, what the timing is, where to find more information or ask questions, perhaps a utility website that contains updated information. And in addition to that, and I guess I should take a sidebar right now. So funding is available now for addressing lead service lines, ending with the fiscal year 26 bipartisan infrastructure law. And so Office of Drinking Water expects water works that have lead service lines to obtain the funding now, to pay for replacements, and to have a plan for lead service lines. So as a result, the expectation is there really is a plan. If your water system has lead service line, the expectation is that you have a plan to replace those and that you can explain that to your customers. What I can say is after this time, after the fiscal year 26 BIL is gone, Office of Drinking Water can't make any promises about funding after then. If a water system chooses to wait until the lead service line and so on replacement is mandated by the lead and copper rule improvements, in other words, into 2027 and later, water systems shouldn't count on the BIL and the SRF program for funding, and will need to look for funding elsewhere. And I would say, according to the lead and copper rule, lack of funding is not an acceptable reason for failing to replace lead service lines and galvanized requiring replacements. So some water systems might not have a complete funding strategy by October or so when these notices need to go out. And so we realize that things will need to develop and the funding strategy could change over time as the facts change. So it would be sufficient in this case to inform customers that lead service lines customers with lead service lines that the system is exploring funding opportunities, and then notify customers of the opportunities once the strategy is settled. Another approach would be to explain the waterworks approach and say something like contact us at a phone number or visit our website for updated information. But still the expectation is that water systems will avail themselves of the funding that's available now and have a plan in place at some point to address the lead service lines that they discover during the inventory. As far as programs that provide financing solutions to assist property owners with replacement of the customer-owned portion of the lead service line, certainly the FCAP program has service line replacement funding through BIL, and that can be used. More information will be provided later on. And in addition to that, the Southeast RCAP has some funding available to property owners. And you should contact Kenny Rogers or Ellen Smith at Southeast RCAP to learn more about this. And these are based on the property owner's finances. And so they would have to apply for this. And there's some thresholds and determinations that need to happen, but this is a possibility that's above and beyond the FCAP program. So let's move on to galvanized requiring replacement. And let's zoom in a little bit here. So when you have a galvanized requiring replacement, the requirement is a statement that the service line is galvanized requiring replacement, an explanation of the health effects of lead. The CFR don't specify that you need to provide the required health effects language. We put it in the template, just the same. Some steps that the persons at the service connection can take to reduce exposure to lead in the drinking water, and we've gone over that. And then information about opportunities for replacement of the service line. We've talked about that. And let's see what we got here for the next slide. And this basically it's the same slide that we've already talked about. So we'll go ahead to lead status unknown. And I wanted to zoom in. Got the wrong thing going on here. For a lead status unknown, the requirement includes a statement that the service line material is unknown but may be lead, an explanation of the health effects for lead, including the required language, which we've seen, steps at the service connection, the persons at the service connection can take to reduce exposure to lead in drinking water, and we've talked about that, and information about opportunities to verify the material of the service line, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. So the expectation is that our water system will have a service line verification program, which is seeking to turn unknown service lines into known service lines. And so that needs to be communicated to the customer. And that includes things like how, when, by whom, and what to expect. What customers can do to self-identify their customer service line materials. And here's an example of what could be on a web page with self-identification instructions. And this is provided to us by EPA. They have a go to protect your tap web page, and certainly some other water systems have created self-identification instructions that you can use. And so the expectation is that customers can help with self-identifying their service line materials and can move things forward that way. And so I guess we've already covered this. So we have the templates, and I guess these are the delivery requirements. So we have templates on our guidance webpage that we visited already. Those need to be delivered to the person served at each of the service connections. The delivery method would be mail or another method that's appropriate and approved by the state. So, for example, we would expect that hand delivery would be satisfactory for a community water system. For non-transient, non-community systems, that could be mail or hand delivery or posting, and all other methods would be approved on a case-by-case basis. So after all this is done, there is a requirement for reporting back to the state. And so what the CFR says is annual reporting to the state by July 1st that the system provided notification and delivered lead service line information materials to the affected customers with lead galvanized requiring replacement or unknown service lines for the previous calendar year. And water system shall provide a copy of the notification and information materials to the state. And so what Virginia is asking water systems to do is to complete a delivery certification statement. And that's available on our webpage that we just visited. And we're asking water systems to get that to us 30 days following completion of the notification, and no later than July 1st. And that's due annually. And to that, we would expect copies of notification and information materials to be attached to that so that we can see what you told your water system customers. And so with that, I'm going to stop. And I've seen that there's been a bunch of messages, but I'll ask if there's some questions.
Bob,
Uh,
one question about
oh.
templates.
Yes.
Since the templates include us or having us fill in our own information and explanations based on our system, how do we determine how much deviation from the template will require a review by ODW?
That's a great question. I would say if you're telling your own story, I think that's following the template. On the other hand, if you're doing something that's different than what's in the template and is not in keeping with what we've just talked about in the presentation, that needs to be discussed with the field office.
Okay. Another request that came a little bit earlier was we need a written VDH definition of premise plumbing. Do you want to talk about what we mean by premise plumbing?
So what I mean by premise plumbing is the plumbing inside a house or a building.
All right. Tamara, you had a couple that you were gonna raise, I think.
I was just gonna go down through the list. Bob, I don't know how much time you have allotted because there's quite a few. So maybe I'll just pick a few at random. Tell me
Sure.
when you're ready to move forward. But we do have someone with their hand raised. I believe Kevin, high school. You had a question. You had your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Tamara. I just was curious. So if utility sends out letters and they get a certain amount returned, which is going to happen, of course, what's the expectation for those that have been returned, undeliverable or for whatever, vacant homes or whatever the reason may be?
Okay. I think the CFR and the waterworks regulations don't spell out what the expectation is. I think if you make a reasonable attempt to deliver that to the homeowner or the resident, it needs to be the person who's drinking the water. So it needs to be the resident. The homeowner might be someone somewhere else. I think that's reasonable.
Okay, so as long as the letters have gone out, we've made the reasonable effort, and of course we'll certify that. Then we're not expected to keep going back to undeliverable addresses.
Right.
I mean, aside from annually.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's fine. And then I think there was a question about rental properties. And in most communities, the renter is the one who receives the water bill.
Yeah.
And so they should be the one that's receiving the notice.
Okay.
I had another one.
So
Go
I'll
ahead.
supervisor.
Thanks.
But I'll text him is this a cell phone I can text to? Okay, I'll text him his name, his contact number.
And if everyone could please mute if you're
Right.
not speaking, that would be appreciated.
So my other question was on the definition of service line, premise plumbing, et cetera. So there was a statement in a previous meeting with VDH that there's not an expectation for utilities to go inside the home, so that the termination, or also referred to as the building inlet, would be at the edge of the building envelope of the premise. So I just want to follow that down a little bit further, because what that's going to mean is that with lead lines, you're leaving, that you're leaving a portion of lead, right? So you're going to have it's either considered a partial, which is how it would be considered today by EPA's description, or there's a potential, or maybe there's a potential anyways down the road that EPA says, yeah, we let you do that, but now we want to go get that as well. Can you speak to that, to the termination point? We haven't seen a clear definition of that, and I think a lot of the consultants we speak with are anxious to hear that.
So Tamara, does the SRF program and the LEAP program have input on that?
So for at least for us, and with EPA's definition, the premise plumbing, technically the customer's responsibility would start at the first isolation valve of the home. So, you know, we all know that it could be right inside the basement, it could be right outside the foundation. So that's kind of the expectation, especially when it comes to funding. And what we would pay for is that the service line cutoff point to the premise plumbing is right at that first isolation valve.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, you know, we're talking about older homes, so they're not necessarily going to have you know, an identical configuration. What
Right.
we've been trying to think, you know, like, so we don't want to have to go, you know, 15, 20, however many feet into a customer's home to replace the line. So what we've been trying to, you know, trying to guide people is, you know, you go to that first isolation valve, or 24 inches. Is there a, because, you know, we have to have some kind of a caveat, because we know that these homes aren't built with any particular identical standard like we have in today's code world. Would that be a position the VDH would agree with?
I think so. I think I'll double check on the 24 inches for you. We'll check with EPA on that. But yeah, so far, I mean, we do know people like might not have an isolation valve, or, you know, how far in the house do you have to go? It's a good question. So we'll get a little bit more clarification for you on that 24 inches. Is that sufficient to meet the need? Unless Bob or someone else from the technical side wants to weigh in on that.
No, Tamara, I think that's a good way forward.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Great. And we're getting a ton of questions, everyone. So I don't know how many more we'll be able to get. What we're going to do is just collect all of these questions, anything, we're going to provide answers, and we're going to post everything, including this presentation. It's being recorded, and the PowerPoint slides on our website. So if we don't get to your questions, we will get you some answers and post that on our website as soon as possible. And I see another person with their hand raised. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hi, Bobby Poplitz with Fluvanna County. Town of Grottoes asked a question that I really wanted to hear the answer to. The town doesn't have any lines that are lead or fall under the 3 classifications. There's no additional reporting required, correct? Is what they asked. We have the same situation here in Fluvanna, and I kind of wanted to hear that answer.
So when you say no additional reportings, so certainly there's a requirement for all community systems and all non-transient, non-community systems to complete the inventory and submit that. That's still required. I think there's some water systems that are walking around that are thinking, oh, we have no, you know, we're all plastic, we don't need to do anything, and that's untrue.
No, we're verifying our lines here in Fluvanna, but what we have found when they put this system in, they actually, it was a sanitary district, and they got some sort of funding to bring plastic lines into the homes, up to the home's edge. And that's mostly what we have in the system. We have a couple places where we have some galvanized and some copper, but for the most part, those are like at one of our schools here, we have Fork Union Military Academy. They have some copper line and things like that. Mm-hmm. But the actual homes we're finding, and we're re-verifying some of our unknowns, but most of them are plastic, and we've been able to verify that.
Oh, okay. Does that mean
is there any other requirement after we figure out what all those are for reporting beyond that, the initial reporting?
Complete the initial report and submit that, and then you have to make the inventory publicly available. And we'll talk about what that means in a little bit.
All right, thank you.
Bob, let me jump in and take a minute to clarify a response that I gave to a similar question. So if a system publishes and reports an inventory that is entirely non-lead initially, is there a requirement to communicate yearly to their customers that to again publicize their non-lead status or otherwise kind of advertise the existence of their inventory. We talked about this just the other day, Bob, but yes, there will be a yearly requirement to do that, but not until 2027 with the LCRI is what we expect, correct?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you only need to present the existence of an updated inventory if you make updates between now and then. And one specific thing that I would suggest is if you are classifying lines as non-lead other because you have determined them to be non-lead using statistical methods or predictive modeling, and you encounter the actual material at any point during your normal operations for repair or whatever, and you can reclassify something from non-lead other to non-lead copper or non-lead plastic or whatever the case may be, then you should do that, and that would count as an update to the inventory. Is that your thinking, Bob?
Yes.
So that is
So
still something that should be communicated to your customers. Hey, we have updated this, and maybe summarize, we were able to classify X number of lines as the specific material as opposed to just non-lead other or whatever the case may be. But you won't be required to just kind of re-up your public notification on a yearly basis until the LCRI goes into effect in 2027.
Okay.
Kathy Cogswell, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. That's what I was trying to get to,
Okay.
what additional reporting we had to do, if any.
Right. So, and we'll get to the CCR in a little bit. That also touches on some of the stuff.
If you want to continue, Bob, sorry everyone, we just have more questions than we do time at this moment. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end of this to try to answer as many as possible. So thank you.
All right. So let's talk about the Tier 1 public notification requiring or following a lead action level exceedance. And as a reminder, this is effective October 16th, 2024, and this was required, I think it was part of the BIL, actually. So Congress mandated this. And this is applicable to all community and non-transient, non-community water systems. We have templates, both the Office of Drinking Water template and also an EPA template on the Lead and Copper Rule Revisions Guidance webpage. And the requirement is that within 24 hours after a water system learns of the lead action level exceedance, the expectation is to consult with the Office of Drinking Water Field Office as soon as practicable to notify them of lead action level exceedance and determine if there are any additional public notification requirements. And then issue the public notice within 24 hours after you learn of the action level exceedance, even if you are unable to get a hold of Office of Drinking Water. And to be clear, you might ask, when does the clock start on this? And if Office of Drinking Water calculates the lead action level exceedance and reaches out to the water system, that's when that conversation happens, presumably on the telephone. That's when the clock starts. On the other hand, if the water system calculates and determines the action level exceedance by calculating the 90th percentile, then that's when the clock starts. So for water systems that are collecting lead and copper tap samples this year, between June and September, there's a possibility this could apply to you. And I'm bringing this up because we'd rather not have to do a tier 1 public notice if we don't have to. And that could happen if Office of Drinking Water determines an action level exceedance on or after October 16th, 2024. And you might say, how could that happen if a water system is doing sampling now in June through September of 2024? If your samples come in late and Office of Drinking Water gets those samples after the 10th of October, it's possible that we will not have enough time to calculate the 90th percentile and determine whether there is an action level exceedance or not. And so water systems should have a conversation with their laboratory now about timeliness of reporting the sample results. And as a reminder, results that are received on the 10th day of the month after the end of the monitoring period or after October 10th are late. And so it's important for laboratories to report their results timely. And it's also important for water systems to complete the sampling and deliver the samples to the laboratory to facilitate the timely reporting. So don't wait till the end of September to collect your lead and copper tap samples, because that might cause a problem. So to clarify who gets these tier 1 public notices, it's to all persons that are served by the waterworks. And the delivery method is one or more of the following. Again, this is determined by conversation with the field office. And so options include broadcast media, posting the notice in a prominent location through your water system service area. I think that's appropriate for a non-community system. Hand delivery of the notice to all persons served, or another delivery method that's approved in writing by the state. And so for example, if a water system, it can say we have email addresses for absolutely every customer in our service area, we might be able to approve email, for example. And so there's some required elements. I'm not going to go through all this. These are covered by the template. I'll point out that there's mandatory health effects language, so don't change that language. And there's a mandatory statement at the bottom of the public notice template, and don't change that language either. And there's some specific and slightly new and different reporting requirements. So in addition to sending the public notice to your customers, a copy of that needs to go to the ODW field office within 24 hours, as well as to EPA. Because of the timing requirement, our recommendation is that if you are doing lead and copper rule tap samples from now on, that you should obtain a copy of that public notice template and update it for your water system, and have a plan for completing that tier 1 public notice with each round of lead and copper rule tap samples, and in advance of determining the lead 90th percentile, just in case. So there's also a reporting requirement, and this is at 40 CFR 141.31. So within 10 days after completing the public notice and notifications, we're requesting water systems, actually it's a requirement, to send a copy of the tier 1 public notice plus a certification statement to the Office of Drinking Water field office. And again, all those materials are on the webpage. And I'll stop here and ask if there's questions.
We have a lot of questions in the chat. We really appreciate everyone putting those questions in there, and we're gonna get to those as we can. We do have two people with their hands raised, so if you guys want to go ahead and unmute and ask your questions, that would be great.
Perfect, thank you. On the Tier 1 public notification reporting requirements, you said that takes effect, and this is a mandatory thing, starting September of this year, as in pretty much
Oc-
now?
October 16th, 2024.
Okay, all right. So at
So,
that date,
so what that means is on October 15th, if a water system is notified of an action level exceedance, we're working under the old rule. On October 16th and forward, a tier 1 public notification is required. Is that clear?
it is, thank you.
Okay. So we've got a really long list of questions. I'm gonna pick as many as I can. Some of them, the topics are kind of similar. And yes, just so everyone's aware, we're recording this. We're gonna put the recording and the presentation slides all on our website when this is done, and we'll get to that as soon as possible. One question, Bob, if we just want to also, a couple of people have asked, can you also go over what the definition of a galvanized requiring replacement line is?
Okay, that's a great question. Can we put that one kind of at the end? Actually,
Sure.
I'll need to pull up some of our guidance on that.
Okay,
we can have a
that sounds
conversation
good.
about that.
All right, and some questions, as far as notifications, like notifications to the public, if you could kind of elaborate on that a little bit. We have questions like, can the notification be part of a monthly bill? Can we include it in the CCR? People are asking, how does that notification to the public need to occur?
Oh, okay. So a tier 1 public notice needs to happen within 24 hours. And let me see if I can get back to the slide here. So the timing for this is within 24 hours after you learn about the lead action level exceedance. And so what that means is that severely limits your options to actually deliver that to your customers. And let me see if I can. So the delivery methods that are appropriate to meet the 24-hour requirement would be, for example, broadcast media. So radio and television, that would be pretty much, that could possibly meet the 24 hours. Posting it in prominent locations throughout the water system's service area. So if you have a school, for example, or an office building or a factory or a park or whatever, you can post that in locations where people will see it, and so on. If you have a community water system, probably we're talking about hand delivery, because U.S. mail is not feasible to do a delivery within 24 hours. And we already talked about email.
So door hangers would also be allowed, since they could do that within 24 hours?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That would be hand delivery.
Okay. You said, let me pick one or two more, then we're gonna have to keep going because Bob has quite a few slides and we want to make sure we get through all the material. A couple of people wonder if they don't have lead, if they don't have lead, do they have to make the inventory public, or can they just do a statement? And if they don't have lead, what do they do after the 16th of this year? Do they have to continue doing reporting, researching, or are they good as far as not requiring anything past that time?
Oh, okay. So we'll get to the statement in a couple slides. The expectation is that during normal operations, that water systems will continue to observe the materials that are used for service lines, and they'll continue to update their service line inventory information. So what you need to realize is this is a living document. And for most water systems, you're going to have some unknowns or some information that may be, some of the information may not be 100% reliable. And so when your staff or contractors are doing things like meter replacements or opening meter crocks to do readings or maintenance, the expectation is that this information is observed and collected. Okay, that's a requirement under the lead and copper rule revisions. And so even though you believe there's no lead, the expectation is to continue to collect this information and update your inventory. There may not be a requirement to tell customers that we're continuing to work on this because everything is non-lead, but the expectation is to continue to update this information in your records. And I see Paige is providing updates. Is there more?
There's quite a bit more, but I think we're going to have to keep going because I know you've got quite a few slides. So let's go ahead and keep going. And we're sorry we can't get to all the questions right now, everyone, but we'll do it as soon as possible.
Oh, okay. So these are just some updates and that were made by the lead and copper rule revisions. Recall that if a water system has a lead action level exceedance, there's a requirement to distribute public education materials. And that's not being changed by the lead and copper rule revisions, but the updates are that the water system, the customers that need to receive these, they've added schools, childcare facilities, school boards, obstetricians, gynecologists, and midwives to the required recipients that water systems need to seek out, make sure they receive the public education materials, and that there's new required language, which are health effects of lead. So basically some incremental updates to the public education materials. And again, it only applies if your water system exceeds the action level. And let's see if we can advance that. And I'll highlight this. This is an existing requirement. And again, the public education materials only apply if a water system exceeds the action level. These are existing requirements, but I'll highlight it now because this is highlighting something that's coming. If a large proportion of the population of your water system does not speak English, your notice must do one of the two things: either include information on the appropriate languages regarding the importance of the notice, in other words, the public education materials, or provide a phone number or address where people can contact the water system to obtain a translated copy of the public notice or request assistance in the appropriate language. So in most water systems, VDH, Office of Drinking Water, has not made a determination that a water system serves a large population of non-English speaking consumers. And so in that case, water systems need to follow either number 1 or number 2 above in order to reach a large population of non-English speaking persons served by the water system. And so my recommendation to water systems is to start thinking about this, because this is something that's going to be more important in the future. And so you should be determining if a large proportion of the population of your water system doesn't speak English and how you're going to address it. More to come in the lead and copper rule improvements and the CCR rule. Supplemental monitoring and notification results. And this applies to water systems that exceed the action level. And this is an existing requirement, but this is a reminder. Supplemental, the requirement is that the water system is required to offer to sample the tap water of any customer who requests it, but, and this is important, but the system isn't required to pay for collecting or analyzing the sample, nor is the system required to collect and analyze the sample itself. So there's that piece, and then the other important observation is that this doesn't establish sampling protocol or required sample volume, and so water system needs to think about this, because there is a requirement to offer to sample tap water of customers who request it. What are you going to offer? Are you going to offer first draw samples, which would be at least 6 hours of stagnant or flushed samples? Are you going to offer first and fifth liter samples? That certainly would be reasonable for a home that has a lead service line and galvanized requiring replacement or unknown service line. On the other hand, if the thinking is this is a newer home, it probably doesn't have a lead service line, or we know it's copper, for example, the concern might be the kitchen faucet. In that case, you might consider a 250 milliliter sample that's consistent with the 3 T's for reducing lead in drinking water for schools and daycares. And then if you have more than one protocol, the water works with to keep track of the sample protocol, as it makes a difference on how you interpret the results. And so as part of your lead copper rule tap sampling, the recommendation is that you think about how your water system will address this requirement when that time comes. And so let me stop and see if there's questions that we need to answer here.
Yeah, I think we're going to keep on going just for right now, Bob, and hold out just a little bit more since you've got quite a few slides to go through.
All right, so let's
we'll come back to it.
Let's go to consumer confidence reports. So this part of the CFR, the 40 CFR 141.153, was modified by the lead copper rule revisions, and was not on the list of things that was deferred. And so the things that got changed, they reworded section 6, I guess it is, Roman number 6, that says for lead copper, the 90th percentile concentration of most recent rounds of sampling, the number of sampling sites exceeded the action level and the range of tap sample results. This needs to be included in your consumer confidence report, starting with a report issued next year and beyond. In addition to that, and this goes back to the questions about what do we tell our customers? And this is where you tell your customers, it says the report shall include a statement that a service line inventory, including inventories consisting only of a statement that there is no lead service line, has been prepared, and include instructions to access the service line inventory. So this is where you remind your customers that you have a service line inventory and how to get a hold of the water system to take a look at it, even if it's just the statement. Is that clear? And then there was one other piece here. This is crossed out. So the lead copper rule revisions inserted Roman number 7, and it's a report shall notify customers that complete lead tap sampling data are available for review and shall include information on how to access the data. This number 7 was modified by the Consumer Confidence Report rule, which came out afterwards and got renumbered to a different place in the Consumer Confidence Report section. And so the consequence of that is that we don't need to do that for 2025, but that will be a requirement in 2027. So that requirement is coming. And let's see if I can advance the slides here. There's also required additional health information, and your consumer confidence report has had a statement about lead in drinking water in the past, but this is reworded, and so you need to be aware to update this language for your 2025 and beyond consumer confidence report. I'm not going to read all this. And if you have to do a consumer notification, for example, if your water system has a violation or you're notifying customers of the results, this language, this health effects language has been changed, and it's here on the slide. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but that becomes effective October 16th, 2024. So we're kind of in the weeds here. I'm going to stop here and ask if there's questions or if we can forge ahead.
Sorry, I was responding to a question. I was typing there.
All right.
So we have quite a few, and I'm going to pick a couple of those. Someone wanted to know that they submitted their methodology for their inventory, how they're going to do the inventory to VDH, and they got an approval letter. A good question is, do we have to expand upon that when we download our inventory? Do we have to include any other materials? And I was telling them no, that they do not need to include or add anything other than the inventory. That is correct?
Well, maybe for some situations, there was an expectation that there's a report that explains, for example, if they're doing, I don't know, statistical analysis and so on. I think there was a requirement for a report, and so that would have to be submitted along with the inventory. So
okay, so I was incorrect on that one. So is the report something they download, or is that something they just put together and attach and include with their inventory?
That's a great question. I think that can be sent separately to the field office, the same as when they made the proposal.
Okay. I see a couple of questions on here. I'm trying to merge some of them if possible about schools and daycares. So, people just want to make sure that the school and childcare list is not due by October 16th, 2024. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not due.
Okay. And then how recent should that list be? Like for the schools and daycares?
Well, that's going to be required in the future. So there's not a need to do that and submit it to Office Drinking Water at this time.
Okay.
I'm expecting in 2027 we'll be talking about that some more.
Okay, but should they still have that list on hand for public education requirements?
I don't know that applies.
Okay. I'll do one more question, then we're going to keep going, and we'll try to get back to as many as we can at the end of this. Here's an example of a small town with less than 1,000 connections visually inspects the meter crocs and find no lead lines. In the 950, they gain access, out of the 950 addresses they gain access to. Can the remainder be classified as unknown or unlikely lead?
So repeat the last sentence again, please.
Yeah, so it's a small town with less than 1,000 connections, and they have, and this is all for example, they've gained access to 950 of those connections. And everything that they visually inspected at the meter box and the crocs, there's no lead. Can they classify the remaining 50 addresses, for example, as unknown or unlikely lead?
They would have to classify the remaining one as unknown, unless they're, are they attempting to do, what do you call it, statistical analysis? Is that, if they're,
I'm not quite sure. That's just the question.
yeah,
I think it's trying to determine like as far as like how many are left, you know.
yeah,
We know there's like a 20% rule. I think it's kind of saying, is that good enough? If we visually confirmed out of 1,000 connections that 950 are not lead, can we just classify the remaining 50, or do we also have to at some point visually inspect those as well?
right. So if they're not following a statistical approach, I don't think they can just assume, and I think that's what they're asking. Can we assume the rest of them are non-lead? I don't think that works. If they're following a statistical approach,
It looks like they asked specifically, can they be classified as unknown, unlikely lead? Which doesn't really have the same cut and dry definition as non-lead other, which is what we
yes,
tell people to use if they're using a statistical. So I wouldn't see any reason not to do unknown, unlikely lead, because
yeah,
that is still unknown and still carries all the same requirements as any other unknown.
okay, that sounds good.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and keep on going since it's almost 11:30, and I know you've got quite a few slides, and we'll come back
Sure.
to questions as soon as possible.
Sure. All right, so let's talk about submitting your service line inventory. And I just took a look inside Swift submittals, and so we have something like 250 service line inventories that have been submitted to the state so far, which is good, and we have about 50 more that are in progress, which means that something has been uploaded but hasn't been submitted to the state just yet. And so that says to me that still we have a long way to go. We have roughly 1,600 water systems that need to submit service line inventories, and so and I guess my assessment of the situation is a lot of water systems have not yet got started. And so my recommendation to water systems is get your user credentials now for Swift submittals and start learning how to use the tool. Start with submitting small chunks of your inventory and attempt to upload the inventory in chunks. There's no need to upload your entire inventory in one go or one file. We've provided training on this. The training is all posted on the webpage. There's help available. We'll get to that in the next few slides. And the big idea is you're not done until you upload your inventory through Swift submittals and click the submit to state button and answer the questions that come up. And with that, we'll go on to the next slide. If you need help with user access for Swift submittals, you can reach out to Leslie Holt. Her email is there on the page. We've been having some difficulty with the addresses. We have something called Microsoft TomTom, which is an address tool. And what that does is it provides GPS coordinates to Swift submittals, and it tries to match the address that's provided against a known list of addresses. And that's been returning errors for a lot of water systems, and that's been a problem. And our contractor intends to change that so that instead of errors, it creates warnings, which means that it's a particular service line is not going to have GPS coordinates associated with it, but it'll go into the inventory. And so What you need to know is GEC will be updating the submittals app with warnings rather than errors, and the latitude and longitude would be populated with the geocoding tool's best guess for the latitude and longitude. We're expecting this in early September. So some systems already might have latitude and longitude data for their service line, service lines, and there's, I guess, going to be two choices. We'll enable users to add their own latitude and longitude by having them add 2 additional columns to the end of the Virginia template. And if you would like to do that, if you email to the support@gec1.com, that would be a way to communicate that modified template with the GPS coordinates already built into it. And if you have if you have been uploading and you have a lot of errors in the uploads that are pending, if you can identify the water system and our GEC developer can clear out those errors and have a conversation with your team, again, email to support@gec1.com, and they can help with that. Pivoting to undeveloped building lots, a water system pointed out they have a bunch of these, and here's an example scenario. There's a water main in the street with a 3/4 copper line that runs from the water main to the property line. There's no meter, there's no customer service line, there's no building served, and probably there's no 911 address assigned, so that it's going to be really hard to describe the situation, because a service line means a pipeline or service pipe between the service connection and the building connection, and there's no building. We believe that it's not required to include undeveloped building lots in the initial service line inventory at this time. And so if and when a building is served, then the situation will change. It'll become a service line and it'll get added to the service line inventory. Making your inventory publicly available. This is an important next step after you complete your inventory. And so that's a requirement of lead and copper rule revisions, that those specifically require a location identifier for each lead service line and galvanized requiring replacement. It's easier to provide addresses for all the service lines. And so the guidance suggests some different options, including printed service line maps or printed tabular data. And certainly that could be provided in utility mailings or newsletters or published on a website. As a reminder, water systems serving greater than 50,000 persons must make the publicly accessible inventory available online. And probably the thing you've been waiting for is if your water system has no lead, galvanized requiring replacement, or lead status unknown service lines in the inventory, you can use a written statement instead of all these things above, in lieu of the inventory, declaring that the distribution system has no lead service lines or galvanized requiring replacement service lines. And then you have to describe the methods used to back this up. This is the exact wording from the CFR. So if your inventory has lead and or galvanized requiring replacement service lines, our recommendations are that you prepare a lead service line replacement plan now. And if you have lead service lines, and we'll talk about the funding, you should apply for the replacement funding now. What we've learned from talking to other states is to get both the utility and the service line side replaced at the same time. It's best if the water system coordinates that service line replacement so that it's one, it all happens on the same day, maybe by different contractors, but it happens at the same day and so on. We recommend, what we learned was it works well if there's grant funding that makes it free to the customer, or there's loan funding, which rolls the cost into the water bill. And another possibility is that a local ordinance could make it a requirement in Malden, Massachusetts, which is a city outside of Boston and Cambridge, Massachusetts. The city passed a local ordinance that says that a owner of a home needs to get a certification from the Director of Public Works that their service line is non-lead, and that's triggered by renovation greater than $30,000 or sale of the property or rental of the property to another person. If you need help with your service line inventories, the technical assistance is available from True Penny. And here is the phone number and email address, and that's available. We have paid for this, and that's free to waterworks serving populations of 10,000 or fewer. And that's limited technical assistance. They're also for if you need more or different technical assistance, the water TA is a possibility, and the contact information is here through the Environmental Finance Center. And again, the slides will be available, and I will stop. And this is the opportunity to either ask questions or transition to the funding presentation.
All right, well, let's do a few questions. I'll try to hit on the most recent, and if we have time, we'll go back up to the list. There's been a ton of questions on there, which is great. Some of the most recent questions would be, I've seen several people request that ODW put in writing the definition of a lead service line as well as building inlet. So
okay,
they
so
would like,
the definition
Yeah.
of a lead service line is in the CFR.
the CFR
The
is,
Code of Federal Register. In other words, it's in the
Okay.
lead copper rule revisions.
okay.
Hey,
So-
Bob, this is Kathy Cogswell. I believe the concern comes into where and when the service line starts. I know we've gone back and forth about that a little bit earlier in the presentation, but that's, I think, what they're looking for in writing is basically exactly when does it start?
When? You mean when in time?
No, like where based on like the inlet to the building. There was a quote that was used earlier that says building inlet is not clearly defined. So it's, it connects the drinking water main to the building inlet. And it's
Right.
the fact that building inlet is not clearly defined anywhere. So that's what they're looking for in writing.
Oh, okay. I think that goes back to our conversation about the first valve or 24 inches or something like that.
I would agree that they're the same conversation. Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, someone asked the question, Bob, does the undeveloped building lots definition also apply to demolished structures?
That's a good question. Is there still a meter? And yeah, and is there still a meter? And is there still a customer service line? I don't know. I'll leave that as a question.
Okay, so what would be an example, real quick, of there's a demolished structure? When would it meet that definition? When would maybe a service line or something have to be
If
identified?
if there's some sort of premise, if there's plumbing that could actually use the water, I suppose. I don't know if there's a hydrant or something. I don't know.
Okay, so if there's anything on that building lot where there is a service line providing drinking water that is active
or could possibly be active.
or could possibly be active. Okay. Tons more questions. I'm going to pick one or two more. I've had a couple people question who can download inventories into the web portal. Can like consultants do that, or like different members of the waterworks? And I believe the answer is yes, as long as each one registers. Is that correct?
Yeah, so a water system can have one or more representatives, but it's best if it's limited to one or two representatives. And quite frankly, what's happened is, how do I say this? If a water system owner or representative has hired a consultant, a lot of times the water system representative gives their credentials to the consultant, and the consultant does the actual uploading. I think that's probably okay.
Okay. So it's 11:32. I don't have too many slides, but I definitely see a lot of questions regarding funding. So I'm gonna go ahead and take over here. So I think, sorry, I'm caught up with so many questions. Julie, do I just share my screen of my presentation with everyone? Is that how that's gonna work?
Yep, just go ahead and start screen sharing.
Okay, give me just a second, everyone. Take a
Uh,
30-minute breather with all its information overload. Tons of information here. And let me get to my presentation. So hold on just a moment, please.
That button is right at the center bottom of your screen, Tamra.
The share button. Okay. Yep, I'm just going to my presentation. So hang on just a second. Multitasking.
I'll let you know when it pops up.
Okay. Let's see. View. Gonna hit share now.
Yes.
Okay, and let me know when you can see that.
I am not seeing it yet.
Okay. Let's see. That's recording share. Share.
If you want, I can present it from my screen.
No, I think I just need to hit the button.
There you go. I'm seeing
Okay.
stuff. There you go. Good job.
All right. Sorry about that. And trying to have it so you can view the slides and not my notes. Which button is that one, Julie? I'm sorry.
Bottom right, it looks like a projector screen. Go to your right a little bit, right there. Nope, not that far.
Not that far. This
There,
one.
that one. Up, now we're seeing presenter mode.
I love technology.
You can
Okay.
just slide the bar there on the left next to your slides all the way over, and yeah.
It's still showing presenter mode.
Yeah.
So if you hit present, and then at the top of at the top you can switch the screen around.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking for the present mode button. Sorry about that.
No, to your right. Looks like a lectern.
How about Julie shares, since I'm having technical issues this morning because she is much more organized than I am. Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
Let me stop sharing. I think it stopped. Nope, stop sharing. Sorry, everyone.
Sure. Here, let's see if I can make it work.
Okay, much better. Instantly got it much better. Okay, so we're going to talk about the funding that will be available for lead service line replacements moving forward. Keep in mind, this is like a snapshot right now in time of where we are as far as predicting how much money are we going to have in the future? When will it become available? What will it cover? we don't know. You know, as we all know, things change. Um, EPA makes changes to the regulations every so often. It also affects the funding and how it can be utilized. So just keep in mind when we go through this presentation that it's a snapshot of like right now. Next slide, please. Okay. I just threw this in here. I realize that not everyone probably uses our acronym language as much as we do. So you're going to get these slides. You can download them as you're going through the slides if you have questions on any of the acronyms. What do they mean? What are they talking about? It's going to be included in the PowerPoint for you. So that is just there for your reference in the future, because I'm hoping you can use these slides and interact with them and have them as a good resource as you move forward. So next slide, please. Okay, another question is going to be, who do you contact? Well, it depends on your question, right? This is a little reference guide for you. Again, I'm hoping that you guys can use it. It's based on the questions you have. This is going to kind of point you in the direction of exactly the direction you need to go to. So when we're talking about funding and can we fund galvanized requiring replacement, I've seen that question a lot. Then the FCAP group, Financial Construction and Assistance Group, is who you want to go to with those types of questions. When it comes to your inventory, you know, who's going to review my inventory? What's the status of it? Field office staff. So whoever you're assigned to, whatever field office that is, that's who you probably want to contact. They're also great for the technical aspect of things, which gets into the last column, the Lead and Copper Committee, which Bob is the chairman of. That group also provides a lot of technical assistance as well. So if you're looking at some of the questions we're talking about, what's the guidance that the states put together? What methods are acceptable? What sort of formats should we use? Which templates? Those type of questions, you can contact Bob, who's on this call, and some of the committee members, or reach out to your field office. Next slide, please. Okay, so everybody's probably seen LEAP, you know, that another acronym. What does that stand for? What does that mean? So that's what we call our lead elimination assistance program. And just so if anybody asks the question, is it a grant program? The answer is no. Historically, when we started LEAP several years ago, what we were doing was taking some of the money, that big bucket there, DWSRF is Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, and we would set aside $2 million each year and offer that as a grant for people who would do lead line replacements. Okay. Well, that grant program is not active right now because we have all of the BIL, bipartisan infrastructure law funding. So just in case anyone asked, we are not a grant program. We do not have grants available, but we do have principal forgiveness. So we're going to get into that as we go through some of these slides. So BIL, there's a huge chunk of money, you know, that each state gets, and it's broken down into 3 different categories. So we have the supplemental, which we're going to use like towards construction projects, water treatment plants, distribution systems, things of that nature. And then there's also a bucket for emerging contaminants. So that's going to be PFAS or TTHM, HAA5 issues. And we're going to focus right now in terms of funding on the lead service line bucket, the orange one. Right now, funding that we have available, it has been used for some inventories and replacements. And we're going to talk about what it can be used for moving forward. Next slide, please. So BIL, bipartisan infrastructure law, lead service line funding eligibility. The first question a lot of people might ask is, can we get funding for our inventories? No, we do not have the funding that's left. It will not be covering any standalone inventory projects. That being said, if someone has a lead service line replacement application project and you want to, you know, continue identifying unknowns as you're replacing the lead lines you've found, then you possibly could include additional funding in there to keep doing that research on your unknowns. So again, the key is if lead has been found. Replacements, moving forward, we're going to be focused on only lead service line replacements. No standalone galvanized requiring replacement projects will be considered at this time. And I have Anthony Hess, who's our director, on this call. I hope Anthony's out there somewhere. Anthony, did you want to kind of maybe discuss that a little bit or elaborate more on why there's no GRR standalone projects?
Yeah, I would be happy to.
Thank you.
The EPA released a memo in May. They changed their eligibility for that, and they indicated that starting with the fiscal year 2024, that only those lead service lines would be eligible for funding. Galvanized requiring replacement downstream of unknown or downstream of lead main. None of those are eligible. There is one situation where you may have galvanized requiring replacement on a private side that's downstream of maybe a lead service line on the public side, which may be, but for all intents and purposes, that funding is mainly to replace lead service lines. And that is just the EPA's intention to replace more service lines with the funding.
And just another quick mention on there about, and a lot of times we see lead jointed mains, or so what can happen there is if you have for example, a lead service line replacement project and your main has some lead joints throughout it, you can include that in the application, but that portion of the funding might come out of the different bucket other than the orange bucket. Again, a lot of what we can do with our funding is mandated by EPA. So if you have any questions on any of this, we have some contact information at the end of this, so feel free to reach out to us. Next slide, please. So I put this together because I think it's important. It's a good comparison guide for what does EPA have in the lead service line improvements requirements, what has to be done, and what can we cover with our funding. I think that's always an important question. So I'm going to pick a few of these off of the table. So for example, track and replace lead connectors. That's in the lead service line improvements. It's required. Can our funding cover that? The answer is no, unfortunately. Several of these lead service line replacement plans, as you go through the next 3 years and you've got lead in your system and you start finding things and you're putting together like the final lead service line replacement plan, you can include that cost as part of the project. Also, you can include as part of the project outreach, customer outreach and engagement, picture filters, a lot of the expenses that are associated with the LCR and LCRI can be included. Corrosion control, that's something that's kind of gone over pretty in depth with the LCRI. So the question is, well, I want to do a lead service line replacement project, and I also want to look at my corrosion control and what do I need to do different? You'll have to do a separate application for that because corrosion control goes back to, again, it's not the orange bucket of money. It's going to be a different bucket. So just make sure, and as you do put together your projects, reach out to us, talk to us about that. I did put a note up here at the top. The LSL is still pending final approval, and it is possible it could be after October 16th. So just wanted to throw that out there. Next slide, please. So here's some just ineligible costs that we cannot cover with our funding as part of your project. Absolutely no partial replacements. So, and I'll give a couple of examples of that because everybody asked that question. Partial replacement. So let's say in the town of Tamara, the public side has a lead line, the private side, the customer right across the street has a lead line. Well, if I spend $5,000 of funding that I get from FCAP, or back up a little, going to replace that lead line on the public side. That's mine. I'm taking care of that. If the customer side refuses, which we all know you're going to have people who they might know they have lead, but they do not want to participate. If that line on the customer side is not replaced as well, then our funding will not reimburse you for that one service line. And that is something per EPA that is required. Now, other people, for example, they say, well, we want to help the customers, but we can't use our revenue from our funding. It's just not something that we're allowed to do. Our funding can help with that. So if a big water system, for example, wants to come to us for funding and they want to use all the money to do replacements on the customer side, that is definitely something that we would be happy to help you with. Premise plumbing, from that first isolation valve, and I do realize not everybody has an isolation valve, but for the most part, that's the example I'll use. So from that first cutoff in valve into the home, that is the premise plumbing, and that is all on the customer to replace. We do not reimburse you for bottled or trucked water, routine sampling, and this is one I like to mention because it always kind of catches people if services are not properly procured. So if you've had the same engineering consultant for the past 5 years, you have two choices. You can keep them and pay out of pocket from your side of things, or if you wish for us to reimburse their services, then you have to follow our procurement guidelines. Everybody follows Virginia Public Procurement Act. That's just something pretty typical. But because our money is federal, we also require the MBE, WBE good faith effort. And what that means is exactly what it sounds like. You make an effort to include minority and women business owners to participate in the bidding process. Doesn't mean that they're going to respond, doesn't mean they'll have the lowest bid, but you still make that effort. And that's just something I wanted to put in there because I've throughout working with a lot of you guys with the funding process, that's something that sometimes catches people. Next slide, please. So the terms of our funding. So right now, I should have put that in red. We only have fiscal years 24 through 26 remaining. So we first got our first award fiscal year 22 with the BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funding. So it runs, and it's only temporary, fiscal year 22 to 26. And right now we've spent the first few years, we have some 2024, 25, and 26 remaining. So that's why it's important to try to, everybody knows about October 16th, but after October 16th, get out there and if you can, please continue to identify unknowns. Because if you can demonstrate that there is lead in the system, it's a really good idea that you go ahead with the small amount of time remaining to put in an application next year. Principal forgiveness, that's what we call AKA grant. So if residents, water users are in disadvantaged areas, then they may receive some principal forgiveness. And I'm going to define what that means, disadvantaged. What does that mean? I'll define that in the next slide. If there's a loan portion to your offer, we have a 20-year rate below the market rate, and then you can actually get a loan term for 30 years if you are considered disadvantaged. The amount that you can request on your application, there's no cap. So if you need $5 million and you show the need, then you can request $5 million. It's just up to you how much that you need. And again, right now it's temporary. What happens after fiscal year 2026? Will we get more funding from the government in the future to help cover all of these costs? We do not know. But as we get updates and as we get more information, we definitely will share that with you. Next slide, please. Okay, so who qualifies as disadvantaged? You must meet one of three. We have three ways that people can meet the disadvantaged status. If you go to this tool, I've got the link in all the slides, and it looks something like to the right. It's the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. And if you go there and put in your address, it'll put you in a census tract, right? And what this tool does, it looks at like 8 or 9 different factors that would qualify someone as disadvantaged. It could be the poverty level, it could be the housing indicator. There's a lot of different factors. And if according to that tool, if you're disadvantaged, then we can classify you as disadvantaged. Well, what happens if your water system is disadvantaged, you know, your customers low income, for example, but you happen to be in a census tract where it's not considered disadvantaged. In general, people would say it's pretty well off. You have two more options to qualify as disadvantaged. The second way is if your residents pay 1% or more of that median household income per census.gov. So if they pay 1% or more, we can instantly qualify you as disadvantaged. And the third way that you can meet that definition is by income surveys. And definitely, if you get into, you want to do some income surveys for your area, please reach out to FCAP because we have templates available that you can use to do those surveys. Next slide, please. All right, and this is just a quick, what do we look at when we score your application? So again, the links are in the slides. Hopefully you can access those slides a little bit later. We use Youth Wellbeing Index tool, and it looks at different factors. It looks at poverty, housing, whether or not there's children, you know, at the pre-kindergarten level, population density indicator, all of those things we look at. We also look at per county what the average blood lead levels are in children under 6 years old. And so that's another factor. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just a screenshot at the top of this slide. That's kind of that tool that I just mentioned, the Youth Wellbeing Index tool. That's what it looks like. So you'll know you're in the right spot if it looks like that. And then the following second image down at the bottom, that's some of that blood action level exceedance information that we use. And I just sorted this by the most. So you can see Fairfax County with the study that was done by the state, it's kind of got the most number of cases. It doesn't say it's really high numbers, but it does have the most number of cases. So that is something we look at and we give extra points to if children have tested for higher levels of lead in any of those areas. Next slide, please. Okay, I think this is almost it. I think we're almost right on time. When and how to apply. What do I do? Put steps in there for you. So you can see in the big box down at the right, our next fiscal cycle, fiscal year 2026, will open January 1st and it will close March 7th. And of course, that's always subject to change if needed, and FCAP will definitely keep you posted. But for now, that's the next fiscal cycle. So what you want to do, use the link, go to our webpage. We have the FCAP section, download the application. Note, I would not recommend downloading it now. We need to update it a little bit because, again, EPA has kind of changed the way we might be able to use our funds. We need to update it. So after January 1st, download the application and instructions. Keep working with your FCAP person, whoever it is you're speaking with, along with your field offices. Sometimes there's prerequisites, for example, and those will be listed in our documents. So constant communication with both groups. And then when you're done, before March 7th, send your application to the leap.applications@vdh.virginia.gov. Next slide, please. Okay. And if you have any more questions, if you want to learn more about this, please contact Anthony Hess. He's our FCAP director, and he'll be happy to help you. Does anybody have questions right now for us and for Anthony? Anybody have any questions? I'm going to take silence as no. And like I said, this is going to be available for everybody on the website. So I'm going to hand it back over to you, Julie and Bob, if no one has any questions.
So it looks like there's a bunch of questions that's related to funding. If you go back to the chat.
Yeah, and one thing, I don't know if all of you caught this at the beginning. We are going to offer contact hours for this session. If you would like those, I'm going to be putting into the chat where you can request that.
And just since we got about a couple minutes, I think it looks like Anthony's answered quite a few of the questions that were in the chat. Let's see. One question we had was, did I understand correctly that BIL funding will not cover replacement of galvanized requiring replacement lines if the public sign lead line has previously been replaced? And the response to that was, if the public side that has been replaced was a lead service line, then galvanized requiring replacement is eligible. However, if the galvanized requiring replacement line is downstream of known lead mains, then the line is not eligible for funding. The distinction is if the galvanized requiring replacement line is downstream of the public side service line versus the main. And that is a definition that EPA has put out there. So that is what we go by. Another question financially is, do the non-principal forgiveness monies come with Davis-Bacon requirements? The response is both principal forgiveness and loan funds from the BIL require Davis-Bacon wage rates, Build America, Buy America, and any other federal requirements such as procurement. And here's one more. I'm going to read this one more question, and then Julie, you take over. One more question was, just to be clear, localities are required to treat galvanized requiring replacement lines exactly the same as lead, and therefore have to meet all requirements associated with having a lead line. But unlike lead, there will be no funding to help them address those lines. Very good question. Lead service line inventory is usually a non-construction professional services activity. That's not exactly related. Yeah, Anthony, do you have a response for that one?
Hey, Tamara. Yeah, the answer I had was the follow-up to the previous question that says,
Yeah.
do Davis-Bacon and BABA apply to LSL inventories? And that answer was, the inventory is usually a non-construction professional services activity, and Build America, Buy America, and Davis-Bacon wouldn't apply, but in some cases it might if a construction activity is completed. This other question, localities required to treat GRR the same as lead. And that is the requirement, as I understand from Bob, that localities are required to treat galvanized requiring replacement the same. And in the BIL 2022 and 2023 funding, we were also able to treat them the same. But we got a memo from the EPA in May of this year saying that the funding is now going to only apply to those lead service lines, or like I indicated, those galvanized requiring replacement that are downstream of a known lead service line. So that is a difference between the funding eligibilities and the requirement in the regulation.
Thank you. And that was kind of a point I was trying to get across in the presentation I had, was that is sometimes in some of the language, there are things required that we may not be able to cover with our funding. So if you have questions, if you're not sure, Anthony's information will be on here for you. So please reach out and at least have the conversation so we can see if we're able to help you. That's it. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And I've just put Bob and Anthony's contact information in the chat. So Bob would be for your technical questions and Anthony for your financial questions. And again, if you like those contact hour certificates, those are only for those of you that are here live with us today. Fill out that form, and we're going to try it out and get those to you. Thanks, and have a great day.